My grandmother's house always smelled like lavender and old books, comforting, in a way that made it easy to forget how cold her eyes could turn when she told her stories. She never read from a book, never needed to. The scariest ones always started the same way. It happened near a little house by Hollow Creek, long before you were born. It started with the attic. I hadn't planned on going up there, not so soon after the funeral, but something about the silence in the house made it hard to stay on the first floor for long. Everything downstairs still felt like her, the creak in the floorboards near the sink, the faint scent of Vicks and peppermint tea. It was suffocating. The attic, though, had always been off-limits. A single chain across the hatch and a little brass lock that never looked like it was actually doing much. She used to say the stairs were too steep, the beams too weak, and besides, there was nothing up there but dust and spiders. Still, when I found the key taped beneath the drawer in her bedroom, the one she never let me open as a child, I knew I was meant to find it. The air changed when I pulled the ladder down. Cooler, heavier. I remember thinking how quiet it was up there, like the house was holding its breath. The space was cluttered with boxes stacked like tombstones, old trunks with cracked leather straps, and yellowed furniture half-covered in moth-eaten sheets. But in the far corner, beneath the slanted eaves, was a low cedar chest I didn't recognize. Smaller than the others, its hinges stiff with rust, and on top, a velvet cloth, faded and pressed flat like it hadn't been moved in decades. Inside were photographs, black and white, some blurred with age, others sharp as if taken yesterday, and at the bottom, a leather-bound journal. It was hers. Her name was written inside the front cover in looping script, but the handwriting on the pages that followed felt different, tighter, shakier, as if she'd written them under strain or with urgency. The first entry began like a story, but the voice wasn't the same gentle, theatrical tone she used when telling tales by candlelight. This was colder, more deliberate. It described the same house she'd always spoken of, the one by Hollow Creek, only now there were dates. Locations. Names. A missing girl in 1947. A local priest who disappeared weeks later. Newspaper clippings were tucked between some of the pages, brittle with age, detailing strange sightings, a string of break-ins near the woods, a police report about claw marks on a cellar door no one remembered being built. I turned another page, and there was a photo I'd never seen before. A house. Small, hunched under the weight of a collapsing roof, barely visible through the trees. Exactly as she'd described it. I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. Even after I'd closed the journal and locked the chest back up, the image stayed with me, the warped porch, the broken shutter hanging loose, the darkened windows like hollow eyes staring out from beneath a moss-covered roof. At first, I thought it might be a set piece from some old horror magazine or a photo lifted from a book, chosen to match the story she'd told. But when I flipped the photo over, there was an address written in pencil, 23, Hollow Creek Road. No city, no state. Just the name. I didn't recognize it, but something about the slanted writing felt deliberate, like it had been added for someone who would eventually come looking. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up searching online, trying combinations of town names and counties, any mention of Hollow Creek. Most were dead ends, parks, hiking trails, forgotten ghost towns. But after hours of searching, I found it, tucked away in the archived maps of an old forestry site. A long abandoned road that hadn't appeared on modern GPS since the 1970s, located in a remote stretch of woods just a few hours' drive from where my grandmother had lived. It wasn't on any official registry anymore, but it had existed. Still existed, if the satellite image was accurate. A faint grey line curling into a dense pocket of forest, ending at a single dark speck I couldn't quite make out. The next morning, I called in sick to work and packed a bag, just in case. I told myself I wouldn't actually go all the way, that I just wanted to see if the road was real, if it led anywhere at all. The drive was long and uneventful, winding past farmlands and through quiet towns that felt like they'd been asleep for years. As I neared the location, cell service dropped completely, and the road turned from gravel to dirt, then to something barely passable. I nearly missed the turnoff. A rusted gate stood open, half swallowed by tall weeds and tangled vines. There was no sign, no marker, just the unmistakable curve of a forgotten path. My hands were shaking as I eased the car forward. The trees grew thicker on either side, swallowing the light, and the air grew colder, as if the sun had been left behind. After 20 minutes of crawling forward, the path widened, and then I saw it exactly as in the photo. The house. Real. Slumped and decaying, tucked between gnarled trees that seemed to lean inward like they were trying to hide it, the house never left me. Even after I drove away, heart pounding, windows rolled up despite the heat, refusing to look in the rearview mirror, it clung to me like the smell of rot that had drifted from its open doorway. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I just needed to see it with my own eyes to break whatever spell the story had cast over me. But something shifted after that visit. It started small, a persistent tapping at my bedroom window late at night, always around the same time, 3:13 a.m. I live on the second floor. The first time it happened, I wrote it off as a tree branch, but there are no trees that close. The second time, I turned on the porch light and checked outside. Nothing. No wind. No movement. Just the sound of my own breath as I stood there, trying to listen past the silence. A few nights later, I began hearing my name. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, someone calling softly from a distance, just beyond my consciousness. But then it began slipping into my waking hours. I'd be washing dishes or brushing my teeth, and a voice would whisper, faint but distinct, low and wet like it came through water. I never caught more than the sound of my name, never a face, never a direction. Always just behind me. The more I tried to ignore it, the closer it got. Lights in my apartment began flickering, electronics powering on and off without explanation. I found my front door ajar more than once, even though I knew I had locked it. One morning, I woke to find muddy footprints on my hallway floor leading from the door to the window, then stopping. No signs of forced entry. No evidence anyone had been there. The prints were small, like those of a child. I started to reread the journal, searching for anything that could explain what was happening. One passage mentioned echoes, how once the house knew your name, it sent out pieces of itself, little fragments that followed you home. They'd watch. Wait. Wear you down. The scratching at the windows, the voices, the flickering lights, they were symptoms, not of madness, but of something preparing to be let in. My grandmother had written that you could never unknow the story. Once it reached you, it didn't need the house anymore. It needed you to remember. It needed you to believe. I told myself I wasn't going back, that no matter what I read in the journal or heard in the dark, I'd keep my distance. But by the second week, the dreams had stopped being dreams. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, dirt under my fingernails, my sheets smelling faintly of damp wood and mildew. I began seeing the house even when my eyes were open on the subway, reflected in the black glass of my phone screen, in the corners of my apartment when the lights flickered. Each vision was clearer than the last, like the house was drawing closer, or I was being drawn to it. I knew then that staying away wasn't going to stop anything. The morning I returned, the sky was the color of ash. The road to Hollow Creek felt narrower than before, the trees taller and closer together, bending inward like a throat about to swallow. By the time I reached the clearing, the house wasn't just a ruin anymore. Its roof sagged less. The boards looked damp but solid, like it had been slowly rebuilding itself in my absence. The door hung open, a dark mouth in the crooked frame, waiting. My breath came shallow as I stepped out of the car. There were no birds, no insects, only the faint sound of dripping water somewhere deep inside the woods. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping into a photograph. The air was cold and heavy, and the smell was exactly as I'd imagined as a child: wet stone, iron, and something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers. The wallpaper, though torn and curling, still bore a faded pattern of lilies. My grandmother had described them once, laughing nervously, saying she used to trace the shapes with her fingernail when she was a little girl. I touched the wall and felt a pulse, faint but unmistakable, like the house itself had a heartbeat. As I moved deeper, the rooms shifted. Hallways stretched longer than they should. Doors opened to spaces I couldn't see from the outside. And then the visions began, not hallucinations exactly, but memories that weren't mine. A child running barefoot down the hall, crying. A man's shadow falling across the kitchen floor. A woman's voice whispering my name in the same tone my grandmother used when she was warning me about something. The house was alive, but not in the way a body is alive. It was remembering, feeding me images it had kept locked away for decades. The deeper I went into the house, the more the air thickened, heavy with a metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. The walls seemed closer now, the ceilings lower, and every sound, my own footsteps, my breath echoed back at me as if something else were walking just out of sight. I found a staircase at the back of the kitchen, narrow and steep, leading down to a cellar I hadn't noticed from the outside. My grandmother's journal had mentioned a door no one remembered being built. This had to be it. The steps creaked like old bones as I descended, and with each one, the smell of damp earth and rust grew stronger. At the bottom was a low room lit by nothing but a thin shaft of light from a tiny window near the ceiling. The dirt floor was scored with marks, long, uneven scratches that formed no pattern but felt deliberate, like writing I couldn't read. Against the far wall sat an old wooden chair, and on it, a folded cloth. I recognized the fabric instantly, the same velvet that had covered the chest in the attic. Beneath it lay another journal, smaller than the first. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting inside was not like the entries I'd read before. It was my grandmother's, yes, but younger, more fluid, less guarded. The first page wasn't a story at all. It was a confession. She hadn't just heard the tale as a child, she had been inside the house, just like I was now. The names she'd written, those missing people, they weren't random. They were the ones she had brought here. Some willingly, some not. Her words were frantic in places, pleading in others, as if she'd been writing for herself but also for someone she knew would come after her. She spoke of a bargain. Of something in the house that didn't just haunt but fed. It needed a keeper, someone to lure in the next name, someone to make sure it never left the woods. She had done it for decades, the story a warning disguised as entertainment, preparing me without ever saying what she was preparing me for. The journal ended mid-sentence, ink smeared as if she had been dragged from the page. As I lowered it, the scratching from the walls grew louder, closer, circling the cellar like an animal. The thing she had kept wasn't bound to the house anymore. It had been waiting for me.